Part 9 of the second number of Art in Australia, 1917. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Early Etchers in Australia by Bertram Stevens. Illustrated by Governor Burke Hotel, Old Sydney. Etching by L. Hopkins, in the possession of Mitchell Library, Sydney, and Old Cumberland Street, The Rocks, Sydney. As it was not until the latter part of the 19th century that the art of etching found many votaries in England, and as very few artists of any kind favoured Australia with their presence until then, it is only natural that Australian etching should still be in the early stages of development. The lone precursor of the art seems to have been Conrad Martin's, as there is an etching of his in the Mitchell Library. It is possible that he made other etchings during his long and artistically prolific stay in Australia. I have not found any trace of other etchings until the appearance of Christopher J. Coveney's 20 Scenes from the Works of Dickens, published in Sydney in 1883. These scenes were designed by the etcher and have some artistic value. It was in the same year, 1883, that Livingston Hopkins landed in Sydney. He came from the United States to draw cartoons for the Bulletin, and after he had settled down in a studio in Jameson Street, he took up as a recreation the practice of etching, about which he had already learned something in America. Hop not only had the necessary draftsmanship and patience, he also had enthusiasm, with which he infected a number of other artists then in Sydney. He gave them demonstrations in his studio of the whole process of etching, and Julian Ashton, Tom Roberts, B. E. Minns, and Arthur Streeton were initiated into the mysteries. A. H. Fullwood had acquired some knowledge of etching before coming from England to Australia, and was glad to continue his study of the art under Hop's direction. The disciples went to Hop's house at Mossman, where he kept his press, with their plates, and he did the printing for them. There was very little public interest in etching at that time, and the enthusiasm of the pioneers died down. Hop himself etched a good many plates between 1887 and 1891. The whole 35 prints of I Thought I Had a Stamp About Me were sold at 3 guineas each, and The Fiddle Doctor also sold out in time. But the prints of his etchings of old Sydney and landscapes did not meet with the same success. He has not made any etchings since 1893, as he turned then to the construction of cellos for recreation. Minns, Roberts and Streeton were not sufficiently attracted by etching to continue beyond a plate or two, but Ashton made 6 or 7 before the pressure of other interests compelled him to abandon the art. Fullwood left for England in 1900, and since then has published a number of etchings, which show a distinct advance upon his earlier work. Outside the group just mentioned, Hall Thorpe, who was then on the staff of the Sydney Mail, made some attractive etchings of Sydney streets in 1899 and 1900, and is represented by 2 prints in the National Gallery of New South Wales. Soon afterwards, Thorpe went to England, and for some time the only artist in Sydney who devoted any time to copperplate was Alfred Coffey, who has made a good many etchings. Meanwhile, in Victoria, some etching had been done by the late Mr. Oldham, about whose work I have at present very little information. The late John Mather was also an etcher. It is hoped that in the forthcoming book on etching in Australia, the work of these pioneers and any others who may come to light will receive due recognition. The interesting landscape work of Victor Cobb extends over a number of years, and John Shirlow began etching as far back as 1895. To Shirlow's unflagging enthusiasm is due a great deal of the present interest in the art. It can hardly be called a revival, as it had never been very much alive before. Ernest Moffat and Lionel Lindsay, through seeing prints of Shirlow's etchings, realised that the art could actually be practised in Australia, and soon afterwards obtained materials and produced etchings of their own. A number of young etchers have since arisen in Victoria. Lionel Lindsay moved over to Sydney and was the first to make a successful exhibition of etchings. Sidney Ure Smith, Irene Mort, Bruce Robertson and others carry on the traditions of the craft in the mother state. Etchings are now a feature of the art exhibitions, and have a secure place in the estimation of the small public interested in Australian art. End of Part 9.